Welcome back to the You Die, I Die Sibling Grief podcast. My name is Kim.
I am Kat. We talk about all things sibling grief here, and today we're going to get into a couple of different topics.
We're just going to talk about all the things.
Lots of things.
Where do you want to start?
You know, I am still really reeling with that last piece that we just talked about with the age.
Okay.
Of when people pass away, how
Yeah.
that impacts grief.
I do feel like we've touched on this a little bit when sharing about our personal experiences.
Yeah, definitely we did, for sure.
Because as a reminder, and for anybody new here, Kat and I both lost our younger brothers.
Within like 6 months of each other, too.
Yeah, and also both of them were in their very, very early 20s.
Yeah.
And we were talking about ideas, and what's been really helpful is feedback from other people.
We appreciate you guys.
And hearing other people's stories. And what we found is with people in similar situations to us, when you lose a sibling at that point in life, I think it's important to talk about that is different.
Yeah. I think, and then we've definitely said this before, but every type of grief is layered and nuanced. Mm-hmm. No grief, even though we've both lost brothers, your flavor of grief, so to speak, has been different than mine.
Yeah, because of how the loss happened.
Right, because
and the relationship.
So nuanced. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is different. And I want to also precursor this with different doesn't mean less than or more important or more valid. It just means different.
Yes.
I have no context for what it is to lose a brother later in life, but I have seen people who have gone through that. Mm-hmm. And for me, what I take from that, or at least what's always stuck with me since losing James when I run into that, is at least you guys got a little bit of life together. At 20, I don't want to say that you're not a human being, but you're still a baby in your 20s. I didn't know shit when I was in my 20s, you know?
I think that I want to come back to that because I think that there's a lot to say about how the relationship with your sibling changes when you're living under the same roof versus once you're starting to become adults and have your own life.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to say so the general comparison that we find is people who lose their siblings in their 40s, 50s, even closer to older age. And I know you and I are both kind of bitter about not being able to see our brothers be fathers, parents, partners. And so I think for me, when I look ahead at the what could have been and the future that feels was taken away, because I wonder obviously, sibling loss, any way you spin it, is awful and devastating and life-crushing.
Yeah, it's not easy for anyone, and we're definitely not saying it's easier for you if you've lost a sibling later in life. But I
do think there is something in, if I had lost Brady in my 50s, 60s, we got to live our life together.
You got to live some life together.
Not our whole life.
Yeah.
But significantly more life than what I got to experience, and also I have pieces of him, potentially, right?
Yeah.
You never actually
you have
know.
His
partner.
Potentially would have had his partner, his children. Yeah, and I know I
grandchildren at that point.
Yeah, who knows? Well, exactly. And I have a family friend who, this woman is incredible. She's been through so much in her life. I really admire her. And if I turn out to be half the woman she is, I will be doing great in life. But she did lose both of her siblings later in life. She lost, and they were both to accidents, health stuff and accidents, but stuff that was preventable. So it was devastating, and it's always devastating when it comes out of nowhere too, because you can't plan for grief. But I think when someone's dying and they're sick, it's anticipated versus someone has an aneurysm and they fall over and they never get up again. How do you even begin to process that? Yeah. So I think when I look at that person whom I admire so much, there is a part of me that it's not a jealousy thing, but I'm well, at least you got to see your brother have kids. You got to experience that. And that's not to say that it was always rainbows and butterflies. I think family and relationships and siblings and all of that stuff is hard no matter what, because we're humans and we're messy.
mean, I would rather argue with Brady every day for the rest of my life than not have him.
But that part. Exactly, though. But, like, exactly.
And also, it's not just about, like, the external pieces of him. Like, we're talking about partners and children and grandchildren and whatever, but it's also just getting to witness.
Yeah.
I mean, your sibling is a piece of you. Like, you are a team. And I think, you know, even if that person never married, never had kids, like, just getting to have them go through life with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, I don't know. I mean, Brady was 22. And
like, for James, it was a month before his 22nd birthday.
Yeah. And
that's so young.
I remember, because I know I've shared on here, like, the last time I saw Brady was literally a week before he passed. Mm-hmm. And I remember before he passed feeling so excited because it felt like we were finally, like, having, like, an adult relationship. Like, we were moving into that phase of, like, okay, next time you come down, we're going to go to the bars and we'll, like, do this. But he brought his girlfriend at the time's, like, baby down so we could meet and spend the day with her and do all of this stuff. And so it was, like, not the time.
Right. We weren't going bar hopping with the toddler.
Right. But it was just, I remember feeling so, like, okay, we're at this new part of life. Here. You know, it's like he was out of high school and had been out of high school and was just working, and he was, like, settling. And it was like, okay, now we get to, like, do all of these things, and our parents aren't, like, dictating how we spend our time. Yeah, like, not in a bad way, but just, like, it's just us now.
Yeah.
You know?
And like, that is, like, a really pivotal, I don't even say pivotal, but, like, well, it's pivotal, but it's also just, like, it's big. It's just such a important moment of young adulthood where you, and especially, like, with your siblings, but even as an individual, to be like, I made it. I'm not, you know, living by my parents' rules. I can explore who I am outside of that. And being able to do that with the person that you grew up with is really special.
Yeah. I felt like I was waiting.
Me too. And I can really resonate with what you're saying. Like, I literally remember a very distinct conversation with James in the car where I was like, we're going to go to a festival together. I'm going to show you the ropes. Like, we're going to have so much fun. I just needed him to be, like, a little bit older.
Yeah, like, ready.
And I was planning for it, and then life.
Yeah, and it was the same thing with my sister as well. It's like, I feel like I'm waiting for everybody to catch up so we can, like, go, like, live our lives together. And, like, you know, the sibling dynamic is so unique because you're the only ones who've, like, had the most similar experiences that anybody else is going to have to you in terms of your family dynamic, and, like, you're all living under the same roof. Like,
and even that is still so different and nuanced kid to kid, which is, like, kind of interesting to think about, because they are the people that you are probably going to have the closest experiences with, and still yet, like, you guys could have grown up in the same household and turned out so differently, or, like, experienced different versions of your parents.
But even, like, so with my family dynamic, there were 3 of us kids, and so, like, my relationship with my sister was very different than my relationship with Brady, and their relationship was very different than, like, you know what I mean? And it's like, but we all get it, you know?
No, of course.
And I just feel like, you know, we always talk about feeling, like, robbed.
Yeah, well, it does. It's one of those things, like, you don't want to play the comparison game of, like, well, why didn't I get that? Because that's not helpful.
Yeah.
But there is a part of you, because we're human, and, like, this is just, like, a human thing where you're gonna have the tendency to look next door and say, okay, well, why didn't I fucking get that? Why did my brother die? And not that I'm saying I wanted anybody else's brother to die, but why mine?
And to go back to what we were saying about, like, it's not better or worse or harder or anything from someone who lost their sibling in their 40s or 50s. I would argue that that's a totally different type of loss.
Yeah, it's just different.
Because you're grieving for your sibling, and yeah, you got to live your life together, but say they do have kids, grandkids,
right
partner,
now you're grieving for your nieces and nephews,
exactly,
and your sister-in-law, your brother-in-law, your parents.
There's all these other pieces with it.
Yeah.
So I really want to make that clear and like honor that, because I don't know what that is like.
That. And I would imagine too, like watching my parents go through this at the stage of my life in their life was horrible. But then, and I have like some context for this, like watching my grandparents grieve my brother. I can't imagine watching my 80-year-old parents grieve their son. It was hard enough watching my parents do that when we all had to do it. And then to have like the concern that they are older. And I'm not saying that if you're older, you're frail and you're going to keel over of a broken heart, but it actually is more likely that the stress could kill you as you get older. So I can't imagine what that layer is like.
My people in my family had very significant health things flare up that was triggered from the stress, and my parents are arguably quite young.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that a little if you're open to that, because I feel like we've briefly touched on some of the like psychosomatic stuff that can come up with loss. Like I know for you had like your eye was twitching out of nowhere for like a long time, right?
I had really crazy physical symptoms. I don't want to get too much into the stuff with like certain family members that had health things come up, because it's not my story to tell. Of course. But there were a lot, and it was like life-changing health things.
It is,
like autoimmune disorders that were dormant that flared up.
My gut stuff, like when my brother passed away, for me, like I all of a sudden like had a ton of gut problems, and they thought I had IBS, and they thought I had, like, there was so many things that they like were potentially going to diagnose me with, and it was probably just really stress. Yeah. But the psychosomatic symptoms are very, very real, and they're valid.
So I had an eye twitch that popped up pretty immediately. Again, I think it was just whatever part of my brain just being like, we're done. And then I also, for like probably the first year, give or take, because I only remember it was at least a year because I still had it when I went to my sister's wedding reception, which was right after Brady's 1 year anniversary of passing. Okay. And I still was dealing with a lisp.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah, it was really weird.
That is very odd.
And I thought I was just going to have a lisp forever, which is like fine, but I had never.
Yeah, you're like, where did this come from?
I was just like, okay. And it's really interesting to look back on, because I wasn't really putting two and two together, but I think because I was just processing, I wasn't thinking.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think your brain, and like, I do have a little bit of background in psych. Like, I've worked in mental health. I have a bachelor's in psych, but just from a personal experience, but also, what I do, the little I do know about like what your brain does when you grieve. Yeah. Literally, your brain shuts off. It's like, I don't want to say it shuts your frontal lobe off. That's not what happens. But a lot of like that cognitive decision making, your brain shuts off because your brain needs to start compartmentalizing that grief. And I actually was talking to another friend about this, but when we grieve, like to the point of the psychosymptomatic stuff, it's not just like your heart's broken or you're sad or you miss them.
Your brain is trying
to wrap itself around a new reality.
Well, and it's a new reality, but again, I think what is unique about sibling loss is it is not a type of loss that you anticipate.
Right. Our grandparents,
like we've talked about this so many times, but it's such a big part of it. Yeah. We anticipate that eventually we're going to lose our parents. Eventually we're going to lose our grandparents. Eventually we're going to lose aunts, uncles, people who are older ahead of us. Right. And even maybe if you're like a baby sibling and there's like a big age gap or something, right? But like when you're a sibling and you're in a small cluster of like similarly aged kids, you're like, we're doing this together. And like as the older sibling, I'm like, I'm going first, guys. You know?
Absolutely. Well, and even watching that play out in my family, like I don't know how that's been for you, but like I know I was just telling you before we started recording, my grandmother just lost one of her cousins, and this is not the first cousin she's lost even within this year. This is definitely the second, possibly even the third. There's been a lot of older family members passing away, and it's just been really weird for me, like not in a way where I'm like angry or jealous, but it's just like that weird realization where I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm probably not even going to even have that experience.
So it's interesting to bring that up because I've actually been able, unfortunately, to witness sibling loss from an interesting perspective in the past 2 years.
You've had a lot of people around you.
My meme passed last summer, and so my meme was one of 6. She had a lot of siblings, and they were all actually very close.
Yeah.
And 3 years ago now, I believe it would be. No, maybe. I don't know. Time is weird.
Trauma and time don't exist well together.
My meme's group of siblings, basically since the end of 2022, so actually within only 2 years, has gone from 6 of them to 3.
Yeah, like similar to my grandmother. Like it's happening really quick. My grandmother's so lucky; she still has my aunt, and they are freaking hot tickets together. They're so funny, and I hope that I'm in the mental health and like physical health that they're in when I'm their age. But I have seen how quickly it like has happened over the last year, and it's just weird to know that like you will never experience that, and it's not even that like it's an envy thing, but it's just like
no, because it's
we don't
awful.
Get that,
it's still awful.
Oh my God, yeah.
And again, it's just different because they've lived their whole lives. They've not lived without each other.
They've never lived without. Like that's a wild concept to me. We've gone almost 4 years without our brothers. It's gonna be 5 actually for you coming up.
Yeah.
We just hit 4 with James this past spring. It almost feels like I've always lived without him, even though it's only been 5 years for us. Like, I don't know about for you, but for me, it feels like the longest 4 years of my life. And it's crazy that I have to do this for the rest of my life.
I think what scares me is that there will be a day when I've lived more without him than
out
with
of my
him.
head. Yeah.
Like, I really, it's a wild concept to even have to
there's going to be a point where we hit our lives where
it's kind of like when you have a partner, or like, for example, I moved out of my house with my parents when I was 18. I've lived on my own since I was 18.
Right.
There's going to come a time probably soon that I'm going to have
lived on your own.
Lived on my own longer than I was home.
Yeah, yeah.
And, hitting the 4-year mark was weird for me because I was 4 when Brady was born.
Yeah.
So it was like...
That's how I felt about that 3-year mark.
It felt like a bookend.
Yeah, yeah.
Like 4 years without him, get him for however long, 22 years.
Yeah, 4 years again.
And then 4 years without him again. And I'm like, oh, it's going to just keep being more. Like and then eventually I will have been here longer than I was without him than I was with him.
Yeah.
And that, again, it just comes back to like, these are things that your brain shouldn't have to process and shouldn't have to try to digest.
Yeah.
And because it's just not natural.
Yeah. Well, and because it's not natural, it's even more, not even just of the utmost importance. Like it is the most important thing you will ever do in your life is to be graceful with yourself when you're going through this process, because it's such a mind fuck. It's like I don't even know what to say about it. There's just like, it's so much, and it is not natural. Again, like what we were saying, like if it was a parent or a grandparent, it's still hard. It's grief is always hard, but like that's something that you're anticipating. Whereas like the person you grew up with and anticipated to live the rest of your life with, not really something you were anticipating, and your brain's going to have a really hard time of making sense of that.
Yes.
So you need to be kind to yourself and patient with yourself and gentle with yourself. And I don't know if I've ever actually shared this with you, but this has been a really helpful tool for me, specifically in the last year or so, where like whenever I'm getting really hard on myself, because sometimes grieving gets in the way of living your actual life. And then that's when I get hard on myself, where I'm like, you should be grateful to be here because he's not here to do these things. I actually ask myself to talk to myself the way James would talk to me. And that I think has been the most helpful thing for me.
Yeah.
Is or I frame it as like I try to talk to myself the way I would want James to talk to himself.
Right. Yeah, I think that that's really helpful.
Yeah.
So with your mental health background, because I think that that tip is great and really helpful.
Thank you.
What would you, bringing it back to what kind of started this conversation, right? Like, what would you give as maybe, I guess, like advice, or maybe not advice, but just what would you say to the people who are like, all of these resources about loss happening later in life, no one's talking about people in their 20s? First of all, we are.
Yeah.
We're trying. We're trying. But like, yeah, is there anything from a mental health standpoint that helps separate that?
You know, I think all of it starts with mindfulness, if I'm being honest, with like whether your background's in spirituality or mental health or like anything like that. I really think most things start with mindfulness. Like any positive change is going to start there. So that I would say would be like my biggest suggestion, as well as though like literally just give yourself the space. I feel like there is this perception that like there are feelings that are good and then there are feelings that are bad.
Yeah.
And like anger, that's a bad feeling.
Yeah.
Shame, that's a bad feeling. I just want to say for the record, they're just feelings. They are not good. They are not bad. They just are things that we are experiencing. And most of the time our feelings are just trying to tell us something.
Well,
so give yourself the space to just go through that. Like that's my best advice.
like let yourself be mad.
Yeah,
also,
yeah. Like literally let yourself be angry. Let yourself be hurt.
Yeah. Because honestly, the reality of the situation is it sucks. It's shitty. And no one's going to be like not mad.
Yeah. And like don't gaslight yourself.
Yeah.
You know, like I feel like there is this, and everything in life is a balance. You know, you definitely don't want to be getting so stuck in your grief that you are not living your life and you're not showing up like not just for yourself, but also not for the people around you. Like, you know, you want to be balanced in everything as much as you can be in life, although it's not always how it works out. Yeah. But yeah, I would say, you know, as much as you can, just finding that balance of like allowing yourself to feel the things that you're feeling, not gaslighting yourself into like, you know, not feeling those things because you should be back to your normal life by now or like whatever fucking
God, I hate those
yourself.
people.
Yeah, don't do that to yourself.
Enough people are going to say that to you. Don't do it to yourself.
And you know what? I think that's my biggest piece of advice is like, and I've said this
do
before.
not listen to anybody else.
Yeah. And I know this sounds like a little probably radical, so it may rub some people the wrong way, but the reality is we have a wicked fucking unhealthy relationship with grief and loss in our culture. We get 3 days of bereavement. And I actually was rewatching a show recently, and I didn't do this on purpose, but it was a really interesting synchronicity. And the main character in the show was saying to her brother, like, no one's going to keep giving you passes. Our parents have been dead for 6 months and nobody cares anymore. It's time to move on. And yes, you're right. Everybody else has moved on with their life. And respectfully, that's their life and you're living your life. So if they're not going through the grief and the loss that you're going through, they probably shouldn't be telling you how to deal with it. Respectfully. That would be my best advice. Yeah. Don't listen to anyone who hasn't gone through what you're going through.
Yeah.
And they might mean well, but they might not be experts.
Yeah,
you know?
but sometimes they don't mean well.
Yeah, sometimes they just like think they know what they're talking about.
So all of that to say, like, the world is going to be harsh around grief.
Yeah.
The expectations of how we're supposed to move through it is going to be difficult. So don't create a more difficult environment for yourself in your own mind, because your mind and your brain are already doing like full capacity.
Oh, they're at the max. Yeah. Yeah.
I was also going to say, like, I feel like it really comes down to the difference between emotions and feelings, because emotions, like you said, are not inherently good or bad. They just are. Our feelings is about how we process, how we react, how we respond. What does that actually feel like to us?
Exactly.
When I'm angry, it could be very different to when you're angry.
Right. Inherently,
it's rooting from the same energy.
Right.
But the way we feel about that emotion can be very different. So I think just not comparing your grief to someone else's.
Yeah, that's huge.
Because that's why it's different. Yes, the loss is different, the situation's different, the relationship's different, the type of loss, how it happened, how old they were.
Yeah.
All going to be different and nuanced. And even more so than that, remembering that we are all humans and our brains are all so unique and we're just not going to have the same experience. It's all perception. And even like my sister and I lost the same person, same way, but like our entire grieving processes have been so different, and it's because we're different people and our brains are different, and our relationship with the same person was different.
Of course, yeah.
And so just don't hold yourself to a standard that is outside of yourself.
Yeah, especially too, like, and I appreciate everywhere that I have worked and where I work and the things that I have learned from all of the professional experiences that I've had. But I also want to say this. If you're working in corporate America and this happens in like your life and you are, you know, neck deep in corporate America, you might have a decision to make. And not everyone's going to tell you that. Some people are going to be like, no, you could totally go back to work and make it work. And I'll say that some people can. I think in my personal experience, I know in your experience, and I know in most people that I know that have gone through this, especially people that have lost siblings young, I think it might be different. I think that probably plays out a little differently if it happens later in life. But I know for the people that we know that have lost siblings in their 20s, you're going to probably have a really hard decision to make. And I think for me, the decision was taking care of me or making money.
I think that it also, there's different parts to it, because there's the part of you that is like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
How could I be expected to do this? It does not matter. Nothing matters.
Yeah, nothing matters.
I think the other part of it that I experienced was the reality check of like how respected and understood. Like, what do you mean 3 days?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely more what I meant by like take care of yourself. It's not even about the like, yes, the 3 days. And also though, I'm a whole human being. I'm not a robot.
Yeah.
It's not just about taking care of yourself like because you have to process the death or the grief. It's also the reality check that death brings into your life. And at least for me, it was like, do I want to keep slugging, doing this rat race for the rest of my life?
What's important?
Yeah. Or do I want to cultivate a life of importance and joy?
I will say, like, while the timing of me starting my own business was very much triggered from losing Brady, because I was
inspired by?
I was just like, I can't do any of these other things, and I knew that I was going direction anyway. So I was like, all right, we're just gonna send it, like, and
sometimes you have to,
because that was also like, you know, I was such in the place of like, what would Brady tell me to do?
I was gonna say that was also Brady's energy, which is like, get some,
just do it, like make it happen. I mean, my tattoo is give her some, like just like literally like that. Just do it, like just try. And I do want to say that I do recognize that that is also a privilege. I would not have been in a place to do that if it weren't for my husband, who was only my boyfriend at the time, but nonetheless has always been very supportive, and being able,
he's your husband now.
Yes, and being able to be in a space where I felt safe to explore that and not have as much pressure, because I also want to recognize that like people do lead lives that like they can't just leave their job.
Yes, yeah. I'm not advocating for you to just drop your job.
Of course. But I do think that regardless of if you stay at your job or you leave your job, the decision is gonna come up.
Yeah, the decision comes up. And it may even just be a decision of,
maybe this isn't what I want to do.
Do I leave work at work? Have I been taking work home too much? And is the decision that I stay here? I like my job. I love the people I work with and work for. But do I make the conscious decision to just put it down when I walk out the door at the end of the day.
Or also, am I in a corporate setting that I could be making similar money doing something different that doesn't feel the same way?
Yeah.
So I just think that it's just, there's a lot of layers to it.
So nuanced.
And
yeah, so many layers.
And I do think, again, a part of that for me was just like what the fuck do you mean? 3 days? Like, that to me is just so, honestly, like, repulsive.
No, that's gross. I mean, I was lucky enough, and I think most of us, you were working in Massachusetts, but I think it's a little different in retail.
Yeah.
But if you live in Massachusetts, we are lucky enough where we have access to Family Leave Act. So I was able to take that when James had passed away, because I was working in a corporate setting where like I had access to that.
I was working for a startup at the time, and
So
they
you
basically
didn't
were just like, take your time off, but we can't pay you.
Yeah.
Which I was grateful to just have the time, honestly.
I'm grateful you were too, because I hate to say this, but there are plenty of companies that would have just been like, either take your 3 days.
You don't have a job when you come back.
Or use your vacation time, or we're replacing you.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I think that brings it back to the age difference, right?
Yeah.
Because honestly, if you're already retired, you don't have that coming in.
Or if you're established in the company,
Yeah.
and you're an important enough person where they value you. Whereas, like, when my brother died, I was low man on the totem pole. I was working my way up. I had just gotten my bachelor's. I was considering going back for my master's. And I loved where I work. And even still, I love where I work now. But I'm low man on the totem pole. I don't matter that much. And if I decide to leave or quit, it's not going to fucking matter to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And also, they probably wouldn't think twice about firing me if they needed to at that time. I'm lucky enough I had FMLA, so I didn't have to go that route. But if I was working for a different company, I'm sure they wouldn't have hesitated. Yeah. Bottom man with a bachelor's degree, you're replaceable.
And going back to, like, you know, if somebody is retired, I don't know if this is true, but there's a part of me that is also like, maybe getting back to it is easier also when you're older. Like, not that the loss is less. Well, you've spent your whole life
in that routine.
Yeah.
So I would wonder,
And also, again,
that's
like,
a good question.
If it's, I feel like the loss is, again, it's not anticipated, just for the sake of an argument, but like more expected. It's less of a, I feel like maybe like, the trauma.
Let's put it this way, because like I even know somebody, I know of a person, I should say, that dropped dead at 35 of a heart attack. Actually, I don't even think he was 35. I think he was like 32 or 33. He was in the gym.
That's awful.
If you hear about a 32-year-old having a heart attack and dropping dead, it's awful no matter who it is, but your immediate reaction is like, holy frig, he was so young, what the hell? Yeah. If you hear of like a 55-year-old that had a heart attack and dropped dead, still horrible, still sad, but I think that like visceral, like, what the heck reaction is like not as much, because it's like not unheard of to have a heart attack at 50.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah. And it doesn't make it okay, and it doesn't make it easier, and it doesn't
make it less, doesn't make it good, it's just
it's very different.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to shout that out, because that is something that we have seen come up in conversations quite a bit, because I feel like it's like there's so many ends of the spectrum. You know, there are people who have lost siblings that are like infants or children, which is awful.
I can't even imagine.
But then I feel like there's this weird, almost like sweet spot when you lose someone in their 20s. You've lived a lot of life together.
Yeah.
You know them.
Especially at that point, because like when you are in your 20s, there's that a little bit of that age gap between like your teens and like where you are now. So you're like, I'm an adult. I've had adult experiences. I'm so cool. Yeah.
And then you've got the other part of it where you're like 50s, 60s, and you're like, okay, a lived life, established, experienced. And it's like, you have that core relationship, but you've had time.
Yeah, you've had time.
Whereas that stupid, like 20-something-year-old loss is like, I didn't have time.
Yeah.
I didn't have time. They didn't get to live their life.
Yeah.
And I did have a really intensely strong bond and relationship. Whereas like, if you lose a sibling really young, that bond is still very strong, but it's different. It's just different.
Yeah.
And like, they're a whole person. Like,
yeah, no, and I think that's something too that is probably like different. Like a child, and I'm not saying like I know we keep saying this, but I feel like I just need to stress
you
this
guys because we're
talking about things that are heavy.
They get it.
Yeah, I know.
They
People
get it.
Get like, yeah, but I think losing a child is different. Not your child, but losing
Yeah.
a sibling that is a child,
child.
is different than losing a sibling that would like was getting close to like living their own life, being a dad.
Like they're
doing
still
those
already their
things.
own person.
Right, and exactly that. Like at 20, like you don't really know shit at 20, but you are your own person. You're not a kid anymore.
Yeah.
So I have a question.
Okay.
So I gave a little bit of my feedback from my perspective from the mental health side of things and like my background there. And your professional experience and background is in like metaphysical, spirituality, energy reading. So like, can you share at, I don't want to say surface level, but
I'll keep it light.
at like a light, at a light level.
I won't go too
If you guys
deep
are
on you
curious,
guys.
you can dive in yourselves. But like,
Come
yeah,
find me.
what comes up for you like from that perspective of it? What are your suggestions, I would say?
I think that, how do I answer this without giving my whole belief system?
Are there any things that you do that make you feel closer to Brady? From like a spiritual perspective, even if it's just like, I don't know, like I know for me, I get up and I talk to James every morning. Like that's my ritual.
Yeah.
And some people would be like, that's not a spiritual ritual. But to me it is. To me it feels very calming and like just grounding.
Yeah.
So like that's one of the things that I do.
I have kind of a range of things. So I do talk to him. Usually I just talk to him like I'm talking. You know what I mean? It's not always like how I was last night that I was telling you, which we'll probably talk about in the next episode. But I know you know this, but I actually have a specific tarot deck that I use for divination when I like want a specific kind of like, I kind of treat it like if I want his opinion on something.
Yeah.
Which he should be honored. And I think that honestly, I feel like we've talked about this a lot, and it's honestly a deep part of why we have this podcast, but talking about him to other people, like making it a point to just express that. And it's honestly not even that much of a spiritual thing, I think.
Yeah.
But I think it's so healing because if I get to a point where I'm not talking about him or thinking about him or like including him in my existence, then I start to feel a lot of things. Like I can start to feel guilty.
That was the big one that came up for me when you had said that. Yeah.
Shame.
Yeah.
Like really deep, heavy emotions. And so I almost feel like it's like energetic hygiene to like honor him because he is a part of me and my story. And that I feel like maybe sounds like a really selfish way, but like it's really difficult being somebody in the spiritual community. I have a lot of issues with the spiritual community, as you know. And what has always been really important to me is like authenticity.
Yeah.
And I have really tried to do this delicate balance of not using my trauma to like draw people in.
Yeah.
Because I feel like...
Well, that's like not ethical.
Right. But a lot of people do it. And I don't think it's always intentional. But it's been really important to me to not lead with my trauma.
Yeah.
And like...
But also that's your context for like your experience, right?
Yes. And it's still part of my journey.
Right.
And so it's that balance of like, I'm going to yell from the rooftops that he's my brother. And I want to also advocate for people who are like him because the way that I lost him is very common.
Yes.
And it's not okay.
And that's how I feel about James too, is like they were different things, but they were both common things that were wicked friggin' avoidable.
Yeah. And so it's like, I'm not going to stop talking about it, but I also really, when it comes to my work and my practice, it's just trying to be like, I'm honoring him and I'm saying his name and I'm talking about him and I'm letting people know like this is who I am and this has been my experience. But I'm also not like, I've been through trauma, so you can trust me as a mentor.
Right.
Because,
or like you should feel bad for
yeah.
me.
And also it's like I have so much life experience. Like I've been through like and also like losing Brady isn't the only trauma that I've experienced.
Right. No, not for either of us.
So it's like
our
I
own
don't
life
bring
trauma.
any of that to the table, but I do think that it's one of those things that is tricky because people do relate to me based on certain things, but I try to make it very like I try to separate it while still making it feel like me. I know that doesn't really answer your question because it's not something I do.
No, but I think it does. It's like, and I think we've talked about this before, but just talk about them. Like, don't let them die with their death. Talk about them. And what's coming up for me, because this has just come up for me in my personal life, but anybody who, going off of what you just said, who is going to like kind of meet that with like the opposite of like, oh, you talk about them too much, or you're always talking about them, or all you ever do is talk about them, get rid of those people.
Please.
You don't need them in your life. And that's easier said than done maybe, or like maybe a little bit more nuanced, but you don't need those people in your life because that's not good for your mental health.
Yeah.
That's invalidating of your trauma and your experience. And, you know, maybe you need to find a balance with it, but like at the same time, like if you're running around for 2 years after your sibling died, like a chicken with its head cut off, like I don't really think anyone can blame you because I'm over here. We're getting close to year 5, and I still feel like I don't know what the hell I'm doing sometimes, or most times. So, you know, I just feel like at least for me, what's coming up throughout the end of this episode is like anybody that's in your life, professionally or personally, and they are not being supportive or understanding, they don't need to like baby you. But if they're gaslighting you or like questioning your grieving process, please throw them in the trash. Get rid of them.
Yeah, man. It's tough because I feel like whenever we end an episode, I always want to like leave something hopeful and be like, it gets easier. But like,
well, I don't want to lie and say it gets easier, but I will say that
there are easy days.
There are easy days. And I don't know, what always comes up for me when we finish these episodes is I just appreciate you guys for listening. You know, like I appreciate you guys for listening. I appreciate the feedback, and there's no easy days. There's days that are easier, but there's no easy days, I would say. And like, hopefully this is going to give you a space to come on those not so easy days, I guess. That's what comes up for me when we finish these episodes is I just hope we're finding you guys and you guys are finding us.
I also wanted to just leave this here because I'm not going to lie. So it is nearing the end of July as we're recording this.
Yeah. Whoop whoop summer.
Brady's 1 year. Jesus.
5 years. It's trauma, man. Trauma and time. I said it before and I meant it. They don't go well together. They don't.
Brady's 5-year anniversary of his passing is September 9th.
Yeah.
And I am not having a good time.
Well, 5 years is.
And it's not even here yet.
Big.
It's not here yet.
But it's looming. You can feel it coming, yeah.
And I find that with anniversaries, and I think we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but it's like sometimes I'm fine. Sometimes it hits me a few days after because I feel like, again, eldest sister trauma, like I'm holding space for everybody else. And
like
then once I get past it, then I can.
Yep. Yeah, that's definitely the older sister vibe. Yeah.
But yeah, 5 years is really feeling kind of scary.
Yeah. I think that's understandable.
And so I wanted to just ask any of you guys who have passed that unfortunate milestone of just like, you know, any tips, any thoughts, anything. I'm just kind of, I feel a little bit like I'm treading water.
Yeah.
So if any of you are like listening or watching and you're like, you know, 10 years out, 15 years out, we would really love to hear from you.
Yeah. And I know we've said this on other podcasts, and we are working towards inviting some of our guests. Mm-hmm. But if you want to be a guest, you have something that you feel like would be a really interesting conversation because like you and I have really similar experiences. Of course, there's plenty about it that's different, but it is pretty similar. The boys were the similar ages. We lost them within 6 months of each other, so we had each other.
Yeah.
But if there's anybody that just you feel like you would be able to add a interesting or even not interesting layer to the conversation.
Just like different perspective.
A different perspective. Yeah. I mean, I think it's all interesting to me, but that's just me. But like, we'd love to have you. This is an open forum. Of course, like, yes, we're the ones sitting here doing the talking and the creating, but like, our intention with this is to create a community.
Yeah. And if you don't want to be on camera or like you're not local to us, again, like you can literally email us.
Yeah. We can even read your story if you don't want to be like, if you don't want to be part of the podcast.
Yeah. So I'm trying to like explore the idea of if there's just like a form that we can create for you guys to fill out or like a submission space that would be easier than you guys having to like type out an email, go back and forth. Obviously our DMs and our email are open, but if you guys prefer something else or have any ideas, we'd definitely be open to suggestions because I want to make it as easy for you all as possible because I do understand that like not everybody's comfortable getting on camera and not everybody also I want you guys to feel comfortable like if you want to keep your stories anonymous.
Yes.
Because
100%.
that can allow you to share maybe like more family experiences and things like that. So anyway, we're going to stop blabbering. We're going to record another episode.
Yes, we are. Thank you guys so much. We love you and we will see you next time.
Bye.